This conversation is part of an interview project through the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. We're speaking with Yale alumni in order to more deeply understand the hearts and minds of those who work at the intersection of spiritual leadership and environmental action. Today, we are grateful to be joined by Blair Nelsen. Blair currently serves as Executive Director of the eco-spiritual nonprofit Waterspirit and as representative for the Congregation of the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace at the United Nations. Her work builds bridges between the grassroots and the international on faith and environmental issues. Blair is the co-author of the Climate Pastoral Care course. She speaks and publishes on various topics in the field of religion and ecology, including climate emotions, environmental justice, eco-spirituality, and water advocacy. Yeah, let's start with this question around loss, grief, anxiety in the context of ecological crisis. Can you tell me a little bit about how you and the people you're serving are experiencing ecological grief and or anxiety?
Absolutely. Well, I'll start with a bit of my own story, since it was my own experiences with climate distress that brought me into this work. I felt for a long time that my spirituality was very earth-based and earth-informed. I converted to Wicca when I was in middle school, so that earth-honoring spirituality was always very important to me and was what fueled me to enter my professional life as an environmental activist in a nonprofit space. I was working in the Brazilian Amazon, and I made it about 2 years with a small-scale nonprofit that I started with a group of friends before that project fell apart and I burned out. I was exhausted. I was angry all the time. The scope of the problems just felt crushing to me. And what helped me recover from that was developing my spiritual life and leaning on spiritual tools to help me recover and find ways to return to the work in a more sustainable fashion, sustainable for me. And inspired by my own personal journey, while I was studying at Yale Divinity School, I was starting to hear terms that described the experience that I went through. I was exposed to terms like eco-anxiety and climate grief and these related states of distress, these climate emotions. So when I stepped into this role at Waterspirit, it seemed very natural for me to bring this climate distress work, this climate emotions work into Waterspirit space. I saw the role for faith communities to step in and provide pastoral care for the climate crisis in particular. And what I saw at Waterspirit, we were already very engaged with eco-spiritual programs and advocacy from a faith perspective. And my suspicion was that adding programming on the topic of climate emotions would be that kind of missing piece that would help people avoid burnout and stay in the movement for the long haul. So we started it very much in the spirit of exploration. We started with a pilot program in 2019. We used the Good Grief Network's 10 Steps method, which is informed both by the Alcoholics Anonymous methodology, 12 Steps, and the work that reconnects. It's a peer-to-peer model, which fit very well with myself and my team. And since 2019, we've been hosting these 10-step eco-anxiety support groups, and we've just seen beautiful transformations happen. We've seen the importance of providing this safe sharing space where you can lay down your burdens with a supportive community of people who are engaging in deep listening, and how healing and comforting that is for so many people, so that they can then return to their work and their environmental work in particular in their day-to-day lives. From there, we've expanded beyond these 10-step groups to host climate cafes, to host informational sessions about climate emotions. And one of the things I'm most proud of, in late 2022, we launched a climate pastoral care course. It's an online self-paced course, which I co-authored with Jessica Moorthorpe, who's based out of Australia. And it's a comprehensive overview of the climate emotions, really with the intention of linking climate psychology with the Christian tradition, so that caregivers in Christian contexts can bring this information into their churches and become well-informed caregivers when they encounter people in their own communities experiencing climate distress.
Wonderful. I just wanted to ask a little bit more about the 10-step, support groups, and if you could, obviously without breaking any confidentiality or other things, but just give a little more detail or example of kind of what those groups look like, and yeah, I'd just love to hear a little bit more about them.
Sure. The 10 steps groups are intentionally small group peer-to-peer processes. So myself and a co-facilitator are present in those rooms. We hold space for up to 15 people to share for around between an hour and a half and 2 hours over the course of 10 weeks. Each of the weeks when we come together has a particular theme as well as a resource packet. So there's a bit of a progression to the methodology as well. We start in a place of really grappling with the scale of the climate crisis. It's true scope and extension, because we can't, truly move through the heavy feelings that we're carrying until we face what's really at stake. And from that, really grappling with the scope and the scale and our own complicity therein, we look into other techniques for doing inner work, for evaluating where we're at, what we're feeling. We develop resilience strategies like practicing gratitude, witnessing beauty, understanding some of the cognitive shortcuts that our brains take when we're trying to understand hyper objects like the climate crisis. That expands our compassion for the ways that people around us are reacting as well. We learn to take breaks and rest as needed so that we don't burn out. We do some deep exploring around what kinds of actions are truly meaningful and sustainable for us, since climate action does not always look the same for every person. Everybody has their own skill sets and networks and access. And it's a really exciting, energizing progression to go through, and just deeply meaningful to sit with people in that engaged, intimate way for so long, just holding each other, not talking back, not offering advice, just listening deeply and witnessing people on their journeys.
Thanks. So I want to ask kind of this kind of related to the climate pastoral care course, and also in other ways in your work. Sort of to the extent that you see yourself working from within a specific faith tradition or faith traditions, sort of what strands within that tradition do you draw on most for your environmental work? What does that look like?
Waterspirit's in an interesting position because our mission is to help people of all beliefs deepen their awareness of the sacredness of water and the interconnectedness of all Earth systems. We were founded by a progressive sister of St. Joseph. Oh, I just stumbled over that one. That Waterspirit was founded by a progressive Catholic nun, a sister of St. Joseph of Peace, named Sister Suzanne Golis. And the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace continue to sponsor Waterspirit to this day. So we have this dual access to where we get the inspiration for our work. We have this rich tradition of Catholic social teaching, and we also have access to Pope Francis's letters to the public, Laudato Si, his encyclical letter from 2015, as well as his more recent letter, Laudate Deum, both of which have a very clear environmental focus and focus on integral ecology, recognizing that social crises and environmental crisis are not two separate things, but they are in fact one and must be addressed together. That gives us a very, very powerful mandate to do this environmental work and to truly recognize the fact that we are one with creation, not separate from it, that is a clear course of action, that is a clear responsibility of ours to care for this planet, to care for creation. But at the same time, Waterspirit and the programs that we run create containers for people from any faith tradition to come together, anybody who's inspired by something greater than themselves, to come together to protect Earth as well. So we run some programs that speak specifically to Christian communities, like our Climate Pastoral Care course, or when we partner with groups like the BTS Center to host their Lament with Earth series. We host other kinds of events that are multi-faith encounters. For example, we recently had a webinar in support of a New Jersey Green Amendment, which is one of our advocacy campaigns, where we brought together faith leaders from various traditions to share why their faith tradition demands that we protect the Earth. And we also create containers of encounter. So our solstice and equinox celebrations are a longstanding tradition of ours, where we bring people from many different faiths together to connect with the deeper meaning of the cycles of the season, to rejuvenate us, to build our networks, and to help us return into the world more connected with Earth herself.
I'm curious also to hear whether in the kind of interfaith gatherings and or in any of the specific, more specific strands, whether you also feel people kind of grappling with any parts of their traditions that feel problematic or feel at odds with the work, and just whether and in what ways that might come up, sort of challenges with traditions. Yeah.
I'll be honest, this doesn't come up as often in our work, since I'm usually so connected with people who've already undergone a degree of ecological conversion and are ready to get down to work. When I think about the paradoxes or complications within tradition, I think I encountered that in a more academic way when I was at YDS and learning more about the doctrine of discovery and about the Genesis one mandate to dominate the earth versus the also in Genesis mandate to till and keep. So truly, it's more of an those contradictions feel like more of an academic question than what I actually see in my day-to-day at Waterspirit, where people are ready to connect and to get down to things.
So kind of going to this piece around advocacy and political action, which I know is part of Waterspirit's work. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you see the role of religious groups, leaders, people in political activism around environmental issues and environmental change. In part curious because, some people kind of may say this isn't a religious issue. And so I'm curious to hear kind of whether that's something you feel you've encountered and what you see the role being in particular.
When we're doing environmental work, fundamentally, we're engaged with questions about what makes people change. Our society is not set up to be earth honoring at this point. And so fundamental change is needed both in our systems and in us as individuals. And I believe that one of the ways that we gain the strength to truly change behaviors, habits, ways of thinking can come from our faith traditions. So that's why it's critical for faiths, for religions to be involved in this work of helping people understand their relationship to the world around them differently. We are not discrete, isolated individuals inserted into landscapes. In fact, we are born of earth, fundamentally earthlings, parts of this interconnected web of life. We cannot exist without the trees that are outside my window right now, creating the atmosphere that I breathe. We cannot exist without the microbes in the soil. There is no discrete existence apart from this web of life. But helping people stop and really live into that awareness requires some guidance, requires some help. Many of us are walking around just too tired to change or to do anything differently because we're already struggling to get through the day. But faith leaders have a voice that can help support people as they change. And furthermore, thinking like an activist, we need multiple strategies of accessing leaders who are able to change the structures and systems that can create the society that we're living and doing this work within. And I do believe that in some instances, some of those legislators and decision makers and so forth may be swayed by faith language where they might not be in other instances. So I see faith leaders getting involved in environmental activism as a crucial way of accessing people who might not otherwise be inspired to change, who might not be making the connection between their day-to-day actions and decisions and their deepest held values and beliefs. So the more that we help people in positions of power make those bridges, the greater the chance there is that we're going to see more earth honoring systems actually become the systems that we live within.
Is there, it's so interesting to hear, and I'm curious if there's an example or something that you could, I'd just love to hear more about kind of the role of faith leaders in helping people change to kind of close that gap between sort of our values and our everyday lives. Yeah, so I'd love to hear any examples or more on that.
Sure. I can give a few examples. Where do I want to start? um, One of my roles is to be UN NGO representative for Waterspirit sponsors, the Sisters of St. Joseph of Peace. So in that role, the sisters recently sent me down to Cali, Colombia for the 16th Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. The biodiversity space at the UN is really interesting because the Secretariat has had more openness toward engaging with the faith communities. So for 4 years since its founding, I've been involved with the Faiths for Biodiversity Coalition, which encourages faith communities with UN accreditation to get involved in those high-level biodiversity talks. And going to Colombia recently was just such a joyful experience, also in part because not only was I surrounded by all these other faith representatives from many different traditions who all share this mandate to care for the community of life, but we also had an opportunity to have a small group session with Astrid Schomaker, the executive secretary herself. And when she entered the room with us, I almost like physically saw her shoulders relax and her like setting down her burdens for a moment. And the burdens of the conference were not few, right down to like the Wi-Fi not working for these tens of thousands of people. But with us, she took her breath, caught her breath, and told us that back toward the beginning of these biodiversity talks, her impression was that there was more of a spiritual tone to the language that was being used, even amongst these delegates from these member states, that there was an awareness of just the holy connection of the holy interconnectedness of the community of life. And that that spiritual tone got diluted or lost as the conversations became more technical and even more like dominated by business interests as well. And so she's finding it really energizing and exciting that there's now an increased shift back toward the spiritual in many of the talks. And that's brought by the faith communities, also by the significant presence of Indigenous peoples in that conference space as well. And it was so encouraging to us to hear that as a positive thing. And that hearing her say it confirmed what I had experienced in those spaces as well. When I would hear members from faith communities or Indigenous peoples, take the floor or share statements, more often than not, they were setting the tone for what's truly at stake here. When we're not just talking about like sequences of genetic information, we're not just talking about inert objects that exist purely for human use. In fact, what we're talking about is the holiness of the entire community of life that is imbued with rights by virtue of its mere existence. And so when the conversations between delegates can get so pointed and focus and technical and utilitarian, having other voices in the room to break through that noise and step back and say, actually, here's what's really at stake, recontextualizes the entire conversation. That's a very high level example of when faiths show up and change the tone. But I can also think of a few more like specific and individual examples if that's more of what you're going for.
I mean, that's wonderful. And if you want to share other examples, absolutely would love to hear to you.
Yeah, sure. Let's see, where do I want to go next? One of the things that we love to do at Waterspirit is to get our sponsoring sisters involved in our campaigns as well, because they're just such a presence when they show up. The sisters already had decided that caring for creation was one of their main priorities long before I stepped into this role 5 years ago. And Waterspirit, before my tenure, had already taken the decision that even though we are a water-focused organization, truly we cannot protect water without mitigating the climate crisis. The climate crisis is a water issue. So Waterspirit gets involved in a lot of climate campaigns. One of the campaigns that we're involved in is the campaign to divest the New Jersey state pension from fossil fuels. And that's in alignment with what the sisters have already done with their own holdings. They've divested from fossil fuels across their 3 regions in the US and the UK. So we thought, if they've managed to divest from fossil fuels without, losing any money in the process, wouldn't they be a powerful example of faith principles in action that might sway some of these New Jersey legislators who are considering doing this for the New Jersey pension? So at our encouragement, my advocacy director brought in one of the sisters to one of the New Jersey legislative sessions where they were discussing this divestment bill. And you could see, I wasn't there that day. From what they report back for me, as soon as she began speaking, you could also hear the hush fall over the room, the attention, the way that after she was done speaking, the other legislators, especially those who shared a faith tradition with her, were moved by her words. So we've gotten to see the sisters in action, faith leaders in action, swaying legislators' minds. And it's a very powerful thing when it happens. So that's another example from the advocacy front. But as far as the interpersonal interactions as well, there's a very dearly held story from before my time at Waterspirit. So when was it? Oh gosh, I should know this off the top of my head. But Hurricane Sandy was a major, let me start the sentence again. Hurricane Sandy's impact on the Jersey Shore cannot be overstated. Everybody has their Hurricane Sandy story. And it impacted Waterspirit as well, both impacting the way that we do business and where we're even doing this business from, our office space, but it also impacted our team members individually. Hurricane Sandy happened before my tenure here at Waterspirit. But one thing that our executive director did at that time was 1 year after the hurricane itself, she held a retreat that was focused on helping people process what they had gone through in that past year. And one woman who showed up for the retreat she almost didn't come, but a friend dragged her there. And she says that it saved her life having this spiritual guidance around this natural disaster in which she had lost her home, lost everything. She was experiencing depression. She was experiencing a degree of anger that just felt uncontrollable, that something like this could happen at all. And all of the follow-up steps trying to rebuild her life afterwards. So she's the person who underwent retreat with Sister Suzanne, whose life was fundamentally transformed by making peace with the ocean that the hurricane had rolled over, by making some kind of peace with what had happened. But that peace was only found on the other side of really facing what she was feeling in a supportive spiritual space and being guided to help move through it. So both on the structural level and on the individual level, it's critical for faith leaders to understand um, ecology, to understand the water cycle, to understand climate change, and how all of these things are directly impacting people.
Wow. So I know, as you mentioned, sort of that water spirits work is beyond water. But I'm also interested to hear about the specific piece of water, and, you know, um, the ways in which has kind of often specific kind of importance within spiritual traditions, and also carries a lot of fear in our current context with so much change around our relationship to water, oceans, rain, flooding, all of that, drought. Um, so yeah, I'd just love to hear a little bit about how your perspective on water in the context of this spiritual work. And um, well, yeah, let's start with that.
Water is life, and water is sacred. Ecological sins committed against water are really easy sites to see. Well, now I'm tripping over words again. Sorry.
Don't worry about
Ah, all right.
it.
All right. Um, what makes working on water issues interesting is the fact that it's we all know that water is critical to life, that we cannot survive without access to good, clean water. And therefore, any violations against water become really clear instances of ecological sin where we have a moral imperative to intervene. So, the very clear morality of doing water work is something that draws me to it as well. And there is so much left to do in order to truly protect people's access to clean, safe water in so many different ways. Um, Water is also, as you mentioned, yeah, it's what's the word that I'm looking for? Um, there is a certain ambivalence around water. As you mentioned, that water both is this source of life. And for so many people, it's so healing to have direct contact with water and with blue spaces. And we talk about that a lot at Water Spirit as well. But you're right that when it comes to these major water disasters like flooding or like the absence of water in droughts, um, water is truly a force bigger than ourselves that we also need to grapple with. So there are parallels with the way that we approach water, with the way that we approach divinity or something greater than ourselves. That makes this work really fascinating and complicated. And that's why we need to come together in community to really continue to do this grappling together and sorting out what are our next steps or what are our priority actions or what is our relationship to water truly supposed to be. Water is also so so widespread, pervasive everywhere. Water is in every life form that it's really easy to take it for granted or to not stop to perceive it. So water demands of us presence. Water is easier to understand when it's within a particular container. It's easy for us to love like that particular ocean at that particular beach or that particular river or the water contained in that particular tree outside our window or in a person that we love. So, in order to really understand water, usually we have to understand it through another form of water, another being, which also makes it really interesting that continual challenge to personalize water in some way in order to inspire that direct connection. And from the connection and awe and understanding, we get to the step of protection. And water is also a ground for metaphor. Their particular
Oh,
moment of struggle.
sorry. Just your sound went out for a second, so do you mind?
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we're good. Just Can
Okay. I can,
um can you hear me okay?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Let's just go back to water's also ground for metaphor is where we started to.
Okay.
Awesome.
Uh, yeah. Water is also a powerful ground for metaphor. There's a lot about the physical nature of water that can inspire us in the way that we want to act. For example, my team was struggling to think about what the next few years ahead might look like with the change of presidential administration. And I told them that no matter what happens, we will work like water. Water is persistent. Water can wear away even the strongest rock. And we moving forward will work like water. Faith traditions already have stamina. Many of these are, multiple thousands of years old, but holding to a moral center. So there's a stamina and a persistence within faith. So you double that up with the power of water at Water Spirits, and we will hold to our center and face whatever comes next.
I love that. Um, I'm curious kind of to maybe go back in time a little bit and ask about your own development of this personal relationship to water. Like you were saying, that's often, it's kind of this thing bigger, way bigger than ourselves, and that we kind of feel a sense of intimacy and direct connection with. Um, I'm curious, if you have memories of first feeling connected to water or to other aspects of the non-human living world. But yeah, would just be really interested to hear a little bit about your early kind of building of a relationship with water in a conscious way.
I think my early days were more connected with, excuse me, let me just clear my throat a little bit. All right. So um, I'd considered myself feeling like I was connected with the element of water, kind of in an abstract way as a kid or as a young adult. Like I knew that my astrological sign was a water sign, and I think I was more connected to trees and plants at first. But then uh, when I was a young adult, my family moved to Venezuela. We started traveling around Venezuela, and I got to go to the Venezuelan cloud forest area of Canaima for the first time. That's an area that has these ancient flat top mountains called tepuis, and that's where the highest waterfall in the world is, Angel Falls. And I remember just being this middle school kid blown away by the beauty of these waterfalls and these mountains and um, these rivers that were so dark they looked like iced tea almost. And when you jumped into them, there were these little sparkles of sunlight in the water against the dark background. So it felt like I was floating in space when I was underwater in these rivers. And it really inspired my connection to that forest. That when I went to college, I had the opportunity to study abroad, not in Venezuela, but in Brazil, in the Amazonian region of Brazil, which I figured was close enough to what I'd known from Venezuela. And the time that I spent on the Amazon River and her major tributaries just changed my life. It was the first time I felt something so big that really felt like a personified divine presence present there and speaking to me through the river and the forest together as one unified being. It was truly, truly awe-inspiring and connected me to something so much greater than myself, but in a way that was so profoundly comforting that it just absolutely set the course of my life. I was already pointed in that direction, but that just sealed it for me. Environmental protection, because of my deep spiritual commitment to doing so, was always going to be the course of my life from those moments on.
I'd love to hear about any other either places or people or experiences of that you kind of look to as moments of inspiration in your journey to this work? Anything that might stand out?
Sure. Sorry, one second. Guess who forgot to turn their phone on Do Not Disturb? Sorry. Mom things.
No
Mom
problem at all.
things. Mom never knows when the school's going to call.
Right. No problem.
Okay. So, um, so in terms of what inspires me in this work, I mean, I had early inspirations, authors who wrote books on Wicca that opened my eyes to what an earth-based spirituality could look like. So in my very early years, middle school and high school in particular, they were a lot of my source of inspiration. Um, but from there, I pulled from many different faith traditions. I always found myself extremely curious to learn from many different wisdom traditions and what they had to say about earth protection and the evolution of the spirit in particular. And that's what drew me when I was ready to think about moving back to the US in grad school. That's what drew me to Yale Divinity School. I had a phone call with a graduate student advisor who spoke with prospective students. And he said, look, if you want to study religion and ecology, really, you have to come and study with Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm. That's really where this work is happening. Your choice is clear. And I'm so glad he told me that because he was absolutely right. Through Mary Evelyn and John, I encountered the works of Thomas Berry, the idea of the journey of the universe. They're the first people who taught me about Laudato Si, and so through them and through my other studies of liberation theology at YDS, I developed the theoretical background that allowed me to step into this role at Waterspirit and my role representing the sisters at the UN as well. So I'm deeply grateful to have had that experience with these religion and ecology resources at YDS, and specifically with Mary Evelyn and John, as well as the cohort of students who are drawn to that program.
Great. So yeah, let's turn a little bit to talk about your experience at Yale and the role of Yale, your learning and also the cohort and the community, as you mentioned, in your work. So open question to talk a little bit about how you see that experience shaping your work now.
Yes, I'm certain that I have this job that I do now because of my experience at YDS. Yes, the absolute through line. And the intellectual formation that I received there in classes with Mary Evelyn Tucker and John Grimm, as well as with my other advisors that were teaching liberation theology, especially I'm thinking now of Ben Valentine and Willie James Jennings, were crucial to informing the way that I approach this work nowadays. So Mary Evelyn and John introduced me to Thomas Berry, to Laudato Si, to the ecological phase of many different religions and wisdom traditions, which gave me a broad grounding for the work that Waterspirit does. And since Waterspirit was founded by a sister, St. Joseph of Peace, who was herself inspired to create Waterspirit after encounter with the works of Thomas Berry, having that exposure at YDS was what prepared me to step into this role. On top of my previous experience with nonprofits and environmental action, the religious piece of it really did come through my experience at YDS. Although I can't understate the value as well of the liberation theology from many different writers and activists who I encountered, as well as the decolonial theory that came out through Willie James Jennings courses in particular, helped me step into this role in a way that would be truly aligned with the principles of justice.
Can you just say a little bit more about liberation theology and kind of what that is for people who might not have experience with it?
Put me on the spot. I mean, I have a very functional utilitarian understanding of liberation theology since I have been away from my books for a few years, but largely what I can tell you is that it's a boots on the ground kind of theology. It's taking our religious principles and enacting them in a ways that serves justice, that really keeps an eye on who is the most vulnerable in our communities around us, and that who is both human and non-human persons, who are the people who are most vulnerable, and what is our true priority in being good allies and in protecting those who are truly at the front in a way that is, in fact, compassionate in terms of suffering with and not paternalistic, not replicating tropes of white saviordom in particular.
Thank you. The other phrase that you mentioned that I wanted to ask about was you mentioned the ecological phases of different faith traditions. Just wanted to ask if you could say a little more on that.
Where's my book?
All right.
Right there on the shelf. We got Mary Evelyn and John's Ecology and Religion. This book, which I got because I was in their class and have now marked up very thoroughly, will give you a great overview of the way that many of these major religions are more explicitly articulating what their faith principles have to do with their ecological commitments.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. So just thinking exactly where to turn to.
Oh, actually, can I
Please,
add a little bit on to that last question?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the challenges that I do continue to hear from people who come to Waterspirit, who are a part of a Catholic tradition, they tell me that in too few of their churches are they hearing the principles of Laudato Si preached from the pulpit. That often the ecological work in Catholic churches is coming from dedicated lay people, members of the church community, who are joining together to implement these principles, to green their churches, to take action in their communities. So when we talk about the Catholic Church in particular entering an ecological phase, we know that even though there were thinkers like Leonardo Boff, who's a liberation theologian from Brazil, already keeping an eye on the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor and expounding these ecological principles, it took time for that awareness to reach the highest level and for Pope Francis to write and publish Laudato Si, which was the big moment of tasking the entire church with being Christians by taking care of the earth. But despite that high level ecological consciousness being enacted in the church, what I hear from people is that it's not reaching the individual church communities as well as it should be at this point. So there is still a lot of work to do there to fully disseminate this ecological awareness, but we have seen, at least within the Catholic Church, this major shift toward caring for creation and enacting integral ecology, which is very exciting to see. And I'm happy to be a part of it at this moment in history.
So as we kind of like look ahead towards what the work that's still to be done, and I'm curious, if you were to say something to current and prospective students, people who are interested in this intersection and being a part of this movement and this change in the future, what would you say to them? What pieces of advice or perspectives would you share?
To students who are looking to enter this field, I would say we need you now more than ever. I would say the ecological work of our times only gets more and more critical, and people will need your faith-informed skills as a moral voice and leader, and also as a source of comfort as we face difficult days ahead. So I encourage you strongly to delve into very specifically the ways that you want to serve. Is it offering comfort and guidance as the leader of a church? Is it developing skills to step into a more nonprofit or activist space? Is it showing up to speak with legislators? Is it something that I haven't even thought of yet? But even within this broad field of religion and ecology, thinking about which actions really nourish you in return, even as you practice them, what gives you energy, even as you expend the efforts, because we need a variety of people in this movement. And I truly wish that there were more jobs available at more religion and ecology organizations so that we could all pop people in very nicely while we're doing this work. But there's still a lot of work to do to even raise awareness about what faith has to do with ecology, and for that to then transfer into a field that's easy for people to step into. But what I will say is that it is more critical than ever, including for people to forge their way, to create that space where space may or may not be present right now.
You mentioned kind of the spiritual nourishment part of this, both kind of religion and spirituality as a, you know, something that can help us in our work outwards and something that can feed us inwards. And I realized you had mentioned that earlier, and we kind of didn't come back to it. And I'd be curious just if you wanted to say anything more about that process of your own spiritual nourishment and sustenance in this work.
So 2 days after this last presidential election, I was feeling a lot of really heavy emotions, and a whole lot of trepidation about the next 4 years in particular, but what it might mean for my family, what it might mean for this ecological work that we do, how hard it might become. And I went out to the ocean, and just that direct contact with nature, for as simple as it seems, it just was enough to remind me that no matter what happens, I'm always part of something larger than myself. Just that scale of the ocean, it made me feel like one more droplet, and each droplet is crucial because the ocean doesn't exist without each of the droplets coming together. But still, it was important for me through reading the book of nature to be reminded that there's always something greater, that I can't know all of the outcomes ahead of time. And that I always have to leave a little bit of room in my heart for the miraculous and for something greater than myself. So for me, having direct contact with nature is one of the great ways that I renew and restore myself to be able to stay in this work without burning out. And I know that that is a technique that many people who are drawn to water spirit also use. And that contact with nature is also what inspires so many of us to protect her. It's what helps us remember what our commitments are, what our values are when things get too hectic or too busy or too confusing or too heavy.
Um, yeah, wow. That feels like a wonderful kind of place to bring us to. So, I just want to kind of check in and see if there are places, we have, kind of at the outer edge, about 10 more minutes. So, if there are any places that we haven't gone that you would like to pick up on, this would be a good time to go there, or we can close here. So.
Well, I'll just say I didn't really like my answers to the contradictions in the faith traditions or the ecological civilizations question. So sorry, Mary Evelyn John, if you're watching this, but I failed the test.
You mean the contradictions, meaning like, wait, say what you mean.
You had asked me a question. Hold on, it's on your sheet too. Let me pull it up. There was one about like what strands from faith traditions do you feel are problematic?
Yes.
I guess I circled back to that with well, I'll just see from the pulpit question later on. But yeah.
Right. Yeah, well, if you want to add anything to places that feel, kind of where there's rub, more than welcome. But I loved what you said.
Oh, thanks, Tali. Oh, I'm looking back through the questions that you sent ahead of time to see if there was
Great.
anything else I missed. We didn't talk about the divinity farm this time.
It's true. I know you had mentioned that. Yeah. Would you like to tell that story?
I'd like to. I don't know if they'll use
Great.
this footage, but I'd like to tell it.
Great. Please. Wonderful.
So, one of my most joyous experiences as a student at YDS was being a co-coordinator of the Yale Divinity Farm. I had come up to Yale after living in a rural environment in Brazil for many years and studying permaculture. So, one of the reasons why I became so excited about YDS as a community, apart from the academic part of it, was the fact that on their website, this community farm was splashed big and there's a lovely photo. And I thought, okay, because of that farm, this looks like a place where I might be able to find, a personal, not only an intellectual home. So when I got the chance to step into this co-coordinator role with a friend of mine who also was raised in a earth-centered faith tradition, we just loved loved being caretakers of this space, not only for the physical gardening and planting, but specifically for the community that formed around it. So we were tasked with creating a number of community events at the farm for people, and we love those in particular since our faith traditions had already taught us about the importance of connecting with the cycles of the seasons. We thought, perfect, we'll do our events around the equinox and and midsummer and these other ecologically important moments in the year. And so creating these open earth-centered connecting rituals that let people from any faith tradition come together to celebrate at the farm was a truly special and precious moment for us as facilitators. And amazingly enough, those were directly transferable skills to my job here at Waterspirit, where we also run equinox and solstice ceremonies. So thank you, YDS and the Divinity Farm in particular, for being such a source of joy and professional development for me.